So, welcome to the orchestration Squid planning meeting. I think we're the first one here, so I'm not sure how many people are going to be around, but we're going to go through the topics we've set up. This is what we're planning to do over the next year or so for the S or Squid release. So yeah, we'll get right into it. So the first one we have here is some SMB support stuff. We actually have an entire Etherpad dedicated just to this topic that goes pretty in detail onto it. I also included some of the more high-level stuff that we're doing in these bullet points here. I guess some of the stuff that's actually outside of SMB in particular, some of the other work we're up to do around it that can maybe be used for other things later as well. Yeah, I guess we could talk a little bit about some of the SMB specific stuff. John, since you're here, do you want to, anything you want to say, I guess, to intro this?
Yeah, I'll start with what I kind of call the elevator pitch for anyone who's already familiar with Ceph. It's basically what we're kind of already doing for NFS, but just for SMB. So, in the NFS stack, there's a manager module which configures Ganesha servers and Ganesha exports. And so the idea is to basically do the same thing, only we'll be using Samba and Samba shares rather than NFS. There's a whole bunch of details. It's a bunch of people I kind of invited to the meeting from our kind of Summit and Kubernetes sync org. We're planning on reusing a bunch of that work, which is why I keep talking about sidecar containers. It's one of the things that I want to bring over from Kubernetes into Cephadm. But other than that, it should be fairly straightforward feature-wise. There's all sorts of question marks around performance and what's the best way to bridge Samba and Cephadm. But as far as the orchestrator is concerned, I think I'm just going to give knobs for upstream to let people to choose which backend to use. And then when it comes time to benchmarking and stuff like that, you'll just be able to deploy what you want to deploy, and then people who want to test the performance can do so. I'm happy to go into more details, but that's kind of my high-level summary.
Yes, I'll post a link to the pad. 1 second. So here's the general Squid orchestrator one. And that one has a link to the Samba one. I shared this one, which has this link here, if you want to look at the Samba one as well.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously I've talked with John a lot about this already. So I'm pretty in tune with most of this stuff. And I've already sort of signed off on it. I don't know if there's anything we think is particularly deserves discussion here. I don't know if maybe you want to talk about some of this backend stuff here, or if any of these prerequisite tasks you think are worth going into in detail here. So I've already looked into a lot of it, so I don't have a ton to argue about here.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is the sidecars, which it's not humongous, but it will change how we deploy our systemd unit files. There may be more systemd unit files. Oh, should let Mike in.
I've admitted him. He should be able to join now.
Yeah, so we've discussed this in some of the weeklies already. Specifically, I think it was last week we talked about it some. I've kind of had some back and forth chats with Adam. Long story short, it's a little bit ambiguous because you haven't started the work, but I'm pretty sure we're going to need to move from a model where it's a one-to-one, one systemd unit per Cephadm daemon or Cephadm service, however you want to look at it, to a model where we'll have more than one systemd service per Cephadm daemon. But it's not a major thing. It's just work and a little bit of design. But that's probably where the time investment for the next couple of months will go. And I think doing the manager module will be fairly straightforward because it might actually end up being slightly less complex than NFS, but no promises. At the very least, it should be roughly equivalent. That's it. That's all I have to,
Yeah, I was just
shout
finding,
out without questions.
while you were talking, I was finding, I know you made a etherpad about sidecars in particular.
Yes.
So I was going and looking for that one. So I think I have that one. I added that one to the link here. And that one obviously goes into detail on sidecars in particular. It's I think longer than the SMB one, just on how we're going to implement sidecars. A lot of it is example output, though.
Looks like Michael and Blaine have questions or hands up. Michael, I think you went first.
I did watch for that.
Yeah. Okay, right. So what I wanted to ask is, from what you described, John, it sounds a little bit like you want to kind of have the server instance for Samba be the leading concept here, not the share. Is that correct? Just asking because in the Samba and Kubernetes operator world, we've done it the other way around. We've kind of made the share the leading concept, and then the server is implied by that. So
yeah, that is correct. I think it's in this model, in the Kubernetes world where we have CRDs and it's, you're kind of focused on the resource, it makes more sense to go share first. Here, you kind of have to define a place for your shares to go. So if we don't want to completely diverge from what NFS is doing, it's kind of not my first choice, but it made sense in this design.
Okay, yeah, thanks for confirming.
Blaine?
Yeah, I just wanted to offer up that I saw some mentions to Podman on the like init containers design. I, being unfamiliar with I guess a lot of aspects of Cephadm design, I just wanted to make sure to offer that Podman does have support for defining like pods in the Kubernetes style within it containers and things like that. So if those features are helpful, then
yeah, good point. But on the other hand, Cephadm also supports Docker, so we have to support things that both of them will be able to take advantage of.
Yeah, definitely a fair point. Thanks. That's all I had.
Yeah. Thank you.
We were looking at some of this stuff here that I was highlighting. Even for these, we're looking at sort of what systemd units files they generate, maybe to use it as structure for our systemd unit files, but we weren't actually planning to actually take or use any of this stuff because we're worried about the Docker dependency. We want Docker just to work just as well as Podman for the most part. So we're trying to keep it to more generic features.
Yeah, both of them have the ability to join namespaces. That's the feature that we need to make sidecars work on the Docker/Podman side. Yeah, I'd love to use Podman's pod support, but
yeah, we're pretty limited. I think, at least I know for Ubuntu deployments, we definitely want to be supporting Docker still. So
yeah, I think it's somewhat popular over there. Well, I haven't looked at the stats in a while.
Yeah, so we obviously there's a lot to go into. We could go into detail here about how we're going to do with the module and all of this stuff. But I figured we don't need to go into all of that here. I thought it's going to be super relevant to most people in the call. Yeah, we were just, I guess, does anybody else have anything they want to say about what we've said about SMB support? Any issues, what we're planning to do moving forward, any of that stuff? Seems like we're sort of settled. So there's going to be a lot of, I guess, work and discussion that'll happen going forward, but it's hard to sort of prep all of that stuff now. So if nobody has any initial comments, maybe we can come back to it at the end if you want to go into some detail later, but maybe move through the rest of the topics for now. We have a few more on here. Let's see. So this moves us to the Cephadm binary refactoring. This was actually a topic on the reef blending as well, and we actually did do the first couple stages of that. This also has its own sort of etherpad going into details. This is actually an older etherpad. I think this has been around for probably over a year now.
Yeah, like August of last year, maybe.
Yeah, it's around that time. And so in the reef cycle, we did the phase 0 and most of the phase 1 stuff, which basically was splitting the binary up, not splitting the binary up, but make it possible to split the binary up by having it now be sort of compiled. There was some work in this PR here. Tab is loading. That John took over from Patrick from SUSE near the end, and we were able to get this in as part of the reef cycle. And sort of our plan was, in the meantime, we'll do a bunch of testing. We'll increase the unit testing over a bunch of this stuff in here. And then we're going to now move on to phase 2, which is to start splitting up the file so we can manage it a bit better. Right now, it's like 11,000 or so line, I think at this point, blob, which is a bit hard to work with. And then also to introduce dependencies now that we have the ability to sort of compile them in. So what we wanted to do was have the initial reef release go out. What we've done for this release is we're doing the compile stuff, but we're not actually spinning up the file at all. If you took the cephadm.py that we have right now, you just rename that cephadm, it would work the same as it works pre-reef. So we have that as sort of a workaround. People, in case there's issues, we can sort of go to that. And then assuming things go well on the reef release, we want to actually move into the next phase of this, which is this phase 2 stuff, which is to actually start restructuring it. So I guess this like to be decided date here is going to be basically as soon as the reef release is out, which I think is probably going to be in a few weeks. And then we'll start moving into splitting this up. I think it's just make it a lot easier to manage this. And again, we can introduce dependencies in. We already have some that we plan to go into. YAML and Jinja2, I guess, are the ones that we're looking at right now. That could be some really useful. We want to, for example, as like a side task of this, eventually allow configuration of the log rotate stuff in the binary and just the logging level and all that we do there. Right now is really hard to do because that stuff is all hard coded into an 11,000 line Python script. It was hard to modify it, but once we split this up, I think we'll be able to have some better options for what we can do there. Yeah, so I think that covers most of the points I put in here. I also wanted to point out we did document the new installation method as part of this curl-based thing. If anyone was wondering how this stuff would work, it's now on download.ceph.com, and we just have, you have to insert the actual Ceph release that you're using. And we have the EL9 one in the example here. That's because of the way the shebangs work. EL9 shebangs seem like they would work everywhere, whereas some of the other release shebangs didn't seem to work on other different distros. So we give the EL9 one as a generic solution. You could also, if you're on like some Ubuntu thing that we have to have a build for, you could also use that build as well. And that should work just as well. But if you're not sure, then the EL9 one, I think, should work everywhere. So that's why we decided to go with that. I don't really think I want to say about this more. I think it's something we definitely want to do. It's just a matter of just sort of getting into it. Once the reef release is out, we see that there was no issues with the way the binary is distributed now. Does anyone have anything they want to comment on that? Any opinions?
Just for some context for folks, one of the other reasons we didn't break things up earlier in the cycle is that Ceph project does aggressive backporting. So if we were to start breaking things up early, we'd probably end up with a lot more churn and difficulty backporting. But at a certain point, we also have to commit to just biting the bullet and breaking the thing up so that it's manageable and easier to hack on, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of why we picked after reef release.
Yeah, I'll say at least specifically Cephadm does a lot of aggressive backporting. I think some of the other components are a bit more careful, but because we're always a bit behind everyone else because we have to implement the thing, then we have to implement support for it. So we tend to backport a bit more than most people. So it would have been a bit painful, yeah, if we split this up beforehand, because I think all the backports will have to basically be fully redone in the binary after we do this. But I think it is a good step for like long-term code maintenance. So this is something we want to do anyway. Yeah, I don't know if there's much more to say about that. It is something we have planned. So we've actually been planning for a while, but just once the Squid cycle, I guess, begins, once the reef release is out, we're going to actually start on the real refactoring here. Anyone have anything else they want to say on the refactoring stuff? or it'll be good. Oh, seems like we're okay. Move on to the next thing then. We have NVMe-OF support. So the NVMe-OF project is pretty new. They just sort of started the actual NVMe-OF container and everything. They have their own sort of repo within the Ceph project that goes into this. And for Cephadm, we're trying to add some support for it. It's not going to make the initial reef release, but it's not quite done yet. There's still some issues with key rings, and we don't have any tautology testing for it yet, but the plan is to sort of get this in over the S cycle, and then eventually probably we'll backport this to reef in one of the point releases eventually, but it's definitely not ready for the initial release. So we're still sort of working on it, and we'll have it in, but it's definitely something we want to, again, get the support into. Definitely for the initial Squid release, it will be there, and then we'll have some more proper testing for it and everything on the way there. And by the time the S release actually happens, we want to have this fully integrated and working quite well. This and SMB, we hope to have support for both of those sort of things, those protocols in Cephadm by the end of the release cycle. I'm not sure there's something to go there. There's some details we could go into with the actual issues that are stopping this from getting in with the keyring and things, but those are pretty technical. I don't know if we really have to get into that stuff here. If anybody cares about that right now. Right now, I guess the issue we're having is that we can only get this to work with the admin keyring. We were going to get a more restrictive keyring that doesn't give privileges to do everything to the NVMe daemon. So that's really the last obstacle we have. What was that, John?
I was going to say, this is just for my own education. Is the NVMe-OF image built separately from Ceph/Ceph? I thought it was, but
yes, I know the image itself is hard coded into this. I bet I could just find it real quick, but I know it's not even based on the Ceph image from what I remember. Yeah, so here's the image name they're using right now.
Right.
So it's on the official Ceph quay, but
right.
it is its own image. I don't think it even uses the Ceph image as a base or anything. I think it's just its own thing. I know they got a special one built for testing that was built off the Ceph image as well, but I think it is generally just meant to be its own image with its own dependencies in there and not worrying about the Ceph stuff.
I think that's probably the way to want to go. It came up in a discussion the other day, and I was just kind of double checking because I do think we probably move away. It made sense when everything was just Mon Manager, MDS, blah blah blah, to shove it all in Ceph. But as more stuff gets orchestrated, it probably doesn't make sense to show everything into one image.
Yeah, we're not planning to put the SMB stuff in a Ceph image either, as far as I know.
Right.
So.
It was a kind of it was going to lead back to that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we definitely can move away from that as being a universal image for everything. I think we have stuff for SNMP as well that also has its own image. So there's a few like that are on the edge that aren't using the Ceph image.
Yeah, I think almost all of the monitoring stack uses its own set of images, but yeah, I think for some of the more data path oriented stuff.
Yeah, like iSCSI, which is the closest parallel to this, does use the Ceph image,
right.
But this doesn't seem like it needs it, so we're just doing our own thing. All right, I don't know. Does anyone have anything they want to say about NVMe-OF supports? Any comments of them? I think it's pretty straightforward from our side. There will be another talk on NVMe-OF itself, which I assume will go a lot more into detail on this. I think it's tomorrow.
Tomorrow at the same time as this session, something like that.
Yeah, I know it's soon. Let me just check the calendar. Yes, tomorrow looks like it starts 30 minutes before this one.
Okay, yeah, I see it too.
Yeah, so there will be another talk on that if you're interested in NVMe-OF itself and how it's sort of working. But as far as our implementation for it, it's really just it's almost a copy of how we're doing iSCSI, actually. Just using the NVMe-OF stuff now, and a few details have to change here and there to get that to work. But there's nothing crazy happening in order for us to add support for this. All right. Yeah, if anybody has anything they want to say about that, I can talk about this next one here, which is upgrade history. This has been asked for a couple times. I think this came up at Cephadm. People said they sort of wanted this. And then also we definitely planned it in the reef planning as well. But I think we had a lot more topics back in the reef planning, and we didn't end up getting to this. But I want to prioritize it now and definitely have it for the S release. I think it's nice that when people upgrade, you can look back at the upgrades. I think we'll also be storing them for like the failed upgrades as well. We'll probably keep some of that around so we know why they failed in the past. Useful for some debugging. And then just to see sort of how the cluster has evolved since we at least implemented this upgrade history, whenever that is, probably the initial S release. We'll be able to track and see sort of what path of upgrades have gone through. So there's been some asking for this. We didn't have time to implement it. I don't think it'll be very difficult from a technical point of view, but it's something we wanted to do.
You did add the phased upgrade steps in Reef, right?
Yeah, the staggered upgrade stuff.
Yeah, staggered.
In Reef. So yes, you can upgrade by specific theming type. That's one thing we'll have to, I guess, think about a bit with the upgrade history. Is say if you do a staggered upgrade of just one type and the other type, and you go down them like one at a time, do we need to store all of those somehow? If you think you really only want the one at the end, but it might be difficult to separate those out or combine them into one thing, I guess I should say. So I'm not sure if we'll actually do that, but it would be nice to do something like that if we could. But other than that, it's not super complicated. It'll just basically be, we'll store what image you upgraded to, and I guess what happened. I guess if it was a success or if there was some error or whatever happened. So I don't think it'll be super complicated. Just something we want to have in there. People could use. All right. Let's see. So the last thing I have on here is this improving test coverage. So we have a few holes that are still in our test coverage. I listed a couple of the examples here. So one, I don't think the Cephadm app has any IPv6 support, so we don't have any support for any of that. We have some code in Cephadm and Orchestrator in general that specifically tries to work with IPv6 and like handle those sort of addresses, but we don't actually have any testing for that and the integration testing. So it would be nice if we could somehow figure out a way to do that. But figuring out how to do that is far off. We haven't actually figured out a way how to do it. It's just something we would like to do. One of these options, the ways to bootstrap, this is general deployment testing. We have a lot of our tests go through the generic Cephadm task we have in tautology, and that always bootstraps sort of the same way unless you put some special overrides in. So what we kind of want to do is have more of these sort of overrides, a bunch of different bootstrap specific testing, maybe a whole sort of section of the Orch Cephadm suite dedicated to this sort of stuff, just so that we can cover those a bit more, because those are really, really hard to cover properly in unit tests. So we'd like to have as much integration testing for them as possible. And the monitoring stack I have on here as well.
Does that require, we had talked about it, some changes to tautology or like ability to run like VMs inside of tautology deployed machines. Is that a requirement for the improved test coverage like IPv6? I thought we kind of said it was.
For IPv6 in the current lab, it would be. We'd have to do our own sort of thing. Yeah. For the deployment stuff, we don't need it. We can do deployment tests on other stuff. We just can't use IPv6 in those tests. I think it's really just the IPv6 that we need something special for, like required. From just a resource usage point of view, it could still be interesting to look at the idea of deploying VMs. I don't know if I think when you deploy like do a tautology test, the nodes that are using are already VMs, I'm pretty sure. So we'd have to be able to deploy the VMs on the VMs. I don't know if that'll actually, it depends how they sort of set up the VMs they have right now. I don't know how it'll work right now.
Either way, sorry, go ahead, finish.
Yeah, but either way, it would be nice if we could deploy some VMs on top, if we can make that happen, because we allow us to test a few scenarios that we can't quite get with the current network structure of the lab, and it would allow us to potentially do like a 3-node test on like one node, because we don't use the resources very much. Like we just deploy, we don't really do a ton of workload testing or anything.
Right.
So it would be more resource efficient if, like, say, we could deploy 3 VMs on top of one, and then do a little test with that. because we more care about from a ecological point of view. So it's something we definitely want to look at if it's possible to do that. It would both increase the options we have for what we can test, and it would probably make us more resource efficient. The Cephadms, we could then maybe only use one node as far as the Ceph lab is concerned for a test that normally would have taken 3 or 4. So something we want to look at as well. But we haven't actually dived into this and how possible this actually is, but it's something we want to see if we can figure out on the way to the S release.
Yeah, so it's a little bit outside the context of Cephadm proper, but either lab infra or Teuthology infra changes in order to make this suite cover all the possibilities, right?
Yeah, so we haven't even thought about, say, like if we want to do VMs on it, like what would we use for VMs? Like I have my own tools I use for my personal clusters and stuff, but they're not necessarily the most common things. So we probably want to do something more standard for that. So there's a lot to sort of get into here, like detail-wise, but just want to point out generally, this is something we want to look into, more options for our testing to cover more cases and, again, be a bit more efficient with how we use Teuthology resources.
And one of the reasons I brought it up is if folks want to volunteer, like I know Teuthology, but I don't know Cephadm or whatever, like, hey, let's have some discussions around that topic, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think we definitely want to discuss that with the Teuthology team as well. There have been like VMs deployed there in the past, and in the future with the next couple of years movement of the lab, we're
Right.
going to be using more VMs in the future too. But we haven't really considered currently what kind of platforms we would use. In the past, it was something very custom that we probably don't want to reuse. We want to use something, like you said, more general and well supported.
Yeah, so we'll be going into that, but it's almost like too far away to go into the details right now.
Sure.
I know like that the lab's going to move at some points, which will change probably a few things. And I don't know what actually is capable to be deployed in the VMs right now. I still have to actually investigate that. If you could even do some virtualization on top of what's currently there for VMs or not. So I'll do that.
Yeah.
And obviously, I know some people who work on Teuthology and stuff, so there's contacts to go into there.
Yeah, in the short term, you could even just run a VM on the bare metal hosts, like we do that for some of the RPD community tests.
Yeah, so I'll have to probably ask some people what they're up to right now. But I think this could be really good for us because Cephadm doesn't use very many resources on the actual things it deploys. It'll put a daemon down and then it'll just sit there for 10 minutes doing almost nothing, just to check that all the deployment stuff works. So we could definitely optimize that a little bit. And I think that would help make our suite a bit more efficient. Something to get into.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. Does anyone have anything else they want to say about the test coverage stuff? Any other holes we have or ideas?
I just want to say that the IPv6 stuff would be fantastic. That's been a big hole for a while.
Yeah, we'll have to figure it out. I know it's like the lab itself doesn't sort of have support for it, but I assume if we did some VMs on top of the current things, maybe we could get something to work there. I'm about to look into the possibilities, but I would really love to have IPv6 as well, because that's been a huge hole we've had for a while. We've had some bugs occasionally pop up there, and we never catch them anywhere because they're not tested. It'd be nice. It's Michael.
Right. I just wanted to mention, and I've been a little distracted in the past few minutes. I don't know if John already mentioned it. That might have been the driver for asking about VMs. In our team, we have recently started to establish in the upstream, outside of Ceph organization, a test environment for testing a storage cluster like Ceph installed with file system services on top, specifically in this case, Samba. And that is outside of Ceph, as I mentioned. So it's not intended to replace Teuthology or anything like that, but it's meant to complement it and provide additional test beds for running some test suites. And those are run, in this case, in VMs. So installing a Ceph cluster is what we're currently working on. And then the capability of running some to be defined test cases against some services running on top of Ceph. So, and what we can check with the team is whether this could be extended to also test IPv6 connectivity or interconnectivity. I don't know. I don't think it is part of the test matrix just yet. Just saying. I wanted to mention it here, just so people are aware. This is not meant to replace anything that Ceph Upstream already does, but it's meant to help with additional test infrastructures and capabilities, just to mention.
Yeah, for those not in the know on that topic, this is an evolution of a project that was testing Samba on top of Cluster, and now we're trying to genericize it. So another thing is, so Samba has a lot of pretty good tests, but their infrastructure that mostly runs on GitLab doesn't test any of the clustered file systems at the integration level. So that's kind of where we're trying to fill in the gap for the upstream community. Looking at Ceph first, and then maybe GAFS in the future. GPFS? I forget which one of those two. Yeah. So the interesting thing about technology, I think we can select either a VM. You can ask for a VM, or you can ask for hardware, or it just gives you something, whatever. So I don't know. If we ask for hardware, it could potentially give us something that we could run like a libvirt stack or something on. I don't know. Sorry, I'm like jumping topics while I'm talking.
Yeah, but all the stuff is good. Other testing, I think even the Rook project might do something like that as well, where they have their own sort of testing, where they pull in whatever Ceph has, and they do their own testing on that stuff. So it's always nice for the external projects to have stuff like that, just to make sure we're not breaking their stuff as well.
Exactly. So this is intended to, to test upstream Samba and Ceph code in combination, and to find regressions from basically patches going into master or release branches quite quickly before they get released for real. And it has been serving that purpose, as John mentioned, initially for the Cluster project as the backend storage to Samba. And I think we are on a good path to having the same effect provided by this infrastructure also for Ceph with Samba. So it could be used to generate basically mails about if there are failures by consuming some nightly builds of either project, and then getting notified when there's a regression introduced by a recent change. Just saying, yeah, it is meant to provide with resources like developer resources from the Samba community, some feedback to the Ceph community, so that we know when there's something that can be or needs to be improved. Yeah, agree. So that is Samba community trying to provide some amount of help and support with the testing mutually between the projects, and learning when there's something to fix. We can provide more details about the infrastructure, where to look at it, and how to get information when something fails in the near future, I guess. But the conversion or the generalizing and the conversion to Ceph from Cluster as the default backend is not yet fully complete. It's still in progress. So we are working on it right now. I guess in a couple of additional days or weeks, maybe we will be able to present results and communicate it to the Ceph community as well.
No, that sounds good. I'd be happy to sort of look into it. Even just sort of your test cases would be nice to look at, just to know sort of what you're doing. I know we're going to be doing in the Samba implementation in Cephadm, looking at those test cases, make sure we have something similar to that before we merge our patches in, because we'll obviously be doing our own integration testing with this stuff. It could be cool. So.
And just so to make this very clear, initially we are setting up a Ceph cluster. The plan is to do that with obviously with Cephadm in this kind of near bare metal environment. It's VMs, but anyway. And initially just configuring Samba on top of that kind of manually with steps that an admin would take. And ultimately, we will want to use Cephadm to set up both clusters. So Ceph underneath and then Samba on top. But since that is not there yet, initially it's going to be additional handwork for setting up cluster on top of Ceph after Cephadm has configured Ceph as the backend storage. So yes, this is going to be a first of possibly many steps that we're hopefully going to be able to collaborate together on. And since you're anyway in discussion with John, Adam, I think you're anyway going to be involved in the process here.
Yeah, I definitely have some connection to the Samba stuff. So I'll definitely be on the lookout for that. Because I'd probably like to take some of what you're doing in the tests, make sure we have something like some pieces of it in our testing as well. And so we, I know even earlier, if we're going to break something before you even put something into any of the branches, that would be good. And just to see how you're deploying it would also probably be helpful just for the actual implementation, I imagine. Because we're doing something similar, just going to be sort of automating it. So that's all. That'll be really useful. All right. Does anyone have any other comments you want to make on test coverage? Let me go with this one. I think we're good. So I have, I didn't even add this topic in. There's a topic in here now for OSD redeployment. Does whoever added that want to intro that one?
Yeah, so I added this. I think we talked a bit about this in the past, but I wanted to bring it up again. The idea is that there are some circumstances where you want to be able to change some setting in the object store or change the object store entirely, like from blue store to C store in the future, that require redeploying the object store. Or in some cases, you might want to make a smaller change, like running blue store FSCK or repair, these kinds of like maintenance commands. But eventually across the entire cluster, but it'd be nice to be able to automate that and make that happen on like a per host level or per rack level to avoid like too much data shuffling. Kind of similar to what we do with the scripts to convert Ballast to blue store, or similar to how we're doing the upgrades now as well. So I'm not sure if this fits into Squid or not, but I wanted to bring this up as something that we're gonna would be nice to see in the future.
Yeah, I don't think we looked at a ton because I think since Cephadm started, we've only supported blue store, so we've never had to sort of worry about people moving object stores. But I know like Cephadm has already started doing some work into supporting some of the newer object store stuff, and we'd have to do some deployment work for that. Right now, I think the best you could do is sort of remove the current OSDs and then have a spec that specifies the new object store once it's supported in Cephadm and everything. But we definitely could work on some commands, specifically the OSDs, for doing some more, I don't know, detailed redeployment where you want to change some of the object store and stuff. We just have to make sure we have some good testing for it and everything, and make sure that it actually sort of works before we get into it. But I think that definitely we could do. So we already have the option to redeploy an individual daemon with a new image. So I don't see any reason we couldn't add some support for specific OSD things on that.
Mm-hmm.
Here's where I get to show some of my ignorance. Was C-Store and Crimson, I think they're, at least at some point, they were separate RPM builds, right? Is there going to be a convergence where it's more of a, say, command line switch, or what's the, do you know what the plan is around that?
I think it's not certain what the long-term solution will be. I think it might be emerging eventually, but right now it's still a separate build. So there are two separate containers, one with the Crimson build and one with the what we call classical build.
Right.
So I guess from what you're describing, Adam, today it could be something like the spec file for some subset of OSDs specifies a different object store and a different image.
Yeah, I don't know if the object store stuff's there right now, but the idea would be that you would specify the object store in the spec file, and then once you triggered like to redeploy, or you remove the current OSD, and then when we redeploy a new one based on the spec file, we would then use that new object store to deploy it. So we don't have any actual direct support for doing this redeploy, but we have support for, I guess, basically we can build on top of Cephadm and say, like, if you remove the current one, we'll automatically redeploy that because we do that already, and just use a new object store there. And I think we'd have to we maybe implement something that's a bit nicer. I think there's going to be a very specific use case people are going to have where they're going to want to migrate OSDs, maybe one or maybe a bunch of them, to the new object store. So I think there's something we could look into for automating the whole thing instead of having them do this weird process where they just remove the OSD and then we deploy a new one there.
Right. Yeah, it can also be helpful even when you're not migrating, like in some circumstances when you run into like a bug or something that like causes too much fragmentation, so you want to just reset your object stores sort of thing. It's not that common, but it does happen occasionally.
All right. Yeah, so what we probably want to end up doing for this is sort of, I'll probably talk with you guys later about the actual use case itself.
Sure.
And then once we know what the actual use cases are, it's just a matter of, again, doing the automation and everything. But I think for our side, to figure out the use cases sometimes the harder part. So once we know what people are what to do, it should be a bit easier to look into what we can make available for automation.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks.
All right, sounds good. Does anyone have anything else they want to say about the OSD redeployment? No, seems like we're good. So that finishes the ones I had in the pad here. I guess I'll ask, is there anything anybody wants to go back to here that we discussed earlier, but I think I'd like to go into some more detail?
Hey Adam, sorry. I have a query on the upgrades one.
History?
So I know when you upgrade the Ceph cluster, right? What all daemons are we upgrading? So for instance, I'm like mostly interested in the Ceph, the monitoring stacks.
All right. So the monitoring stacks, if you do a normal upgrade, they get upgraded last. Because the way the upgrade works is it checks two things. One, it checks that it's actually upgraded the daemon to the new image. A lot of times on the monitoring set, that doesn't change at all. It's just the same image anyway. And then it also checks that it has deployed all of the daemons with a manager using the new image. This actually got implemented to handle changes in the system to unit files. We had a bug once where system unit files changed, and then some of the monitoring stack daemons didn't get redeployed with this new sort of structure for the images or for the unit files. And then once you tried to reboot a node that had those daemons on it, they actually were crashing and everything. So automatically we do redeploy the monitoring stack daemons because they will fail that check. They would fail the fact that they were not redeployed by a manager on the new image. So we do them at the very end of the upgrades. And then for the staggered upgrades in particular, there's some weird thing where it'll actually, if you upgrade the manager as part of a staggered upgrade, it'll do them right after the manager. This is the same idea of whenever the manager's on the new version, we can redeploy the monitoring stack daemons and they'll have been redeployed with the new manager. So we do them then because we know we have to. If it's a staggered upgrade, we don't know when you'll finish the upgrade. So we just do it early on after the managers. So yeah, depending on if staggered or not, either upgrades them at the very end or right after the managers are done. If that answers your question. I don't know if I might have lost what your question actually was and all that.
Yep, that sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, so does anyone have anything else from this topic list they want to get into a bit more?
Not from this list, but I guess another area I think it'd be interesting to see more feedback from users in the future is usability type of features. I think a lot of users haven't upgraded to Octopus yet, or releases where they're using Cephadm quite yet. But I think over the next year or so, we'll start seeing more folks upgrade and start getting more feedback from what folks find easy or hard.
Yeah, but it's always good. Because sort of the whole point of the Cephadm thing is to be easier to use than just some manual deployment stuff. So we've always been watching out for feedback that happens now for people who are currently using it. But yeah, once we have a lot more bigger users upgrading there, I assume it's the bigger users who are the slowest to usually upgrade versions. It'll be nice to see some feedback and on what we need to do to upgrade there. I know we had some stuff in last year's planning about just exposing more of what we're doing behind the scenes, just making more things available to people to see. That's still generally a goal we have, even for this release, even though I haven't included it in the pad. yeah, we always are sort of looking into that sort of stuff. So yeah, we'll see as people go move to Octopus or onwards. If we get more users, then we get some more feedback. But we'd be happy to see that stuff as well.
Yeah, it didn't make the list, but Adam and I have also had some conversations about, kind of triggered by some of the people who are a little bit hesitant to move to the containerized world. How can we ease some of their things? And could we do a command that helps them run GDB in a container or something like that? But it's all very, very hand-wavy, so it didn't make the list.
Sure. Yeah, maybe we can talk more about that kind of thing at the weekly meeting sometime.
Yeah, because it came up one time. You might have been there. There was a talk about like a Cephadm, but instead of doing containers, it was doing like packaged versions. And in that discussion, from our side at least, we were talking a lot about the downsides of using the containers. So I think that's somewhere deep into the orchestration weekly Etherpad. I know I've gone back and looked at it a couple of times, but that was one of the things we had from that discussion was, again, the running GDP when the containers in an easier fashion, because that was one of the things people were saying was difficult with containers compared to packages. So we do have a few topics from that meeting from a few months back that we were looking into for ease of use stuff. But again, like John said, it's all sort of early on hand-wavy stuff currently, so we didn't include it in the CDS planning.
Yeah, no worries. I think some of it is also kind of awareness and some kind of maybe training on level stuff. I think during the Ceph Day Vancouver, it was a very kind of advanced user audience because it was the OpenStack Open Infra Summit. A lot of OpenStack users who are very advanced in their usage, but a number of them hadn't tried Cephadm, but were scared of it basically. So I think some level of doing more demos or more showcasing how to do things could help as well.
Yeah, we haven't done a lot of publicity sort of pushes, I guess. And I wasn't able to attend the Cephalcon this past year, so I couldn't do anything there either. So we haven't had a ton in that regard. I just know we'd also sort of aim for to get in. Yeah, we would definitely like to have those sort of people try it out at least, see how it goes for them. So maybe that sort of thing could help push that along. So definitely something to look into. I think we can get some more demos or just any useful information about it, sort of convince people a bit more than we are right now.
Yeah, I appreciate how you guys have been super active on the mailing list as well, responding to any kind of problems people have. That's been fantastic.
Yeah, we try to help at least when I know what the problem is at least. So there's been a few instances that have been good on there. People have actually gotten fixes. Nice. All right. Don't have anything else you want to bring up here? We're pretty close to the hour at this point, so I'd be fine ending things if there's no other topics. But the floor is open at this point. I think we've gone through everything I had planned to talk about. Yeah, seems like we're all good. Yeah, I guess in that case, we can close out the meeting here. I think we got over a lot of the good stuff, all the main things that we wanted to talk about for the Cephadm next year. As sort of got mentioned at the end, we have some other smaller topics that aren't on this list that we're probably going to look into as well. But as far as getting through all the stuff we had planned, I think it went pretty well. Yeah, so I guess thanks everybody for coming. I'll try to shut down the recording now, and y'all here.